Your Honor, my sister is a fraud. She is practicing law illegally, and I demand she be arrested right here in this courtroom. My brother's voice echoed off the marble walls, dripping with malicious triumph. He smirked at me, convinced he had just utterly destroyed my life. The entire courtroom went dead silent. My own lawyer looked at me in absolute panic, whispering, "Is this true?" I didn't say a single word. I just sat there perfectly calm and slid a sealed manila folder across the defense table toward the bench. The arrogant smirk didn't leave my brother's face until the presiding judge opened my file. Within seconds, the judge's face went completely ghost white. His hands literally shook as he read the contents. Without warning, he slammed the file shut, vanished into his chambers, and left my brother standing there entirely oblivious to the trap he had just sprung on himself. The heavy oak doors of the courtroom felt like the gates of a trap, but I knew exactly who was actually caught inside. My name is Amber. I am 27 years old, and up until this very moment, my family treated me like an invisible shadow. As I sat at the defense table, the cold, clinical air of the courtroom hummed with tension. Across the aisle sat my older brother, Victor. At 34, Victor had spent his entire life being groomed to take over our family's multi-million-dollar real estate empire, while I was constantly pushed into the background, dismissed as just the quiet, helpless younger sister. When our father passed away unexpectedly 6 months ago, Victor didn't even wait for the funeral flowers to wither before he moved to strip me of everything. He presented a heavily altered estate document that effectively cut me out of the inheritance, leaving me completely penniless while he claimed the business, the properties, and our father's legacy. He thought I would just cry, accept defeat, and disappear. What Victor completely failed to realize was that my quiet nature wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a period of intense, calculated preparation. For months, he watched me draft my own complex motions and challenge his legal team without hiring a standard local firm. His massive ego couldn't comprehend that a 27-year-old woman could outmaneuver his high-priced attorneys, so he assumed I was secretly cheating the system. He thought this ambush would destroy me forever. Victor's betrayal didn't start in this courtroom. It began the exact moment our father's heart stopped beating. While I was sitting in the hospital hallway, completely blinded by grief, Victor was already in Dad's private office, hunting down financial ledgers and changing the security codes on the company safes. He viewed our father's passing not as a tragedy, but as a hostile corporate takeover. When he finally presented the fraudulent new will, his high-priced legal team tried to bully me into signing a waiver that would surrender my entire birthright for a miserable five-figure payout. Snorts, they expected a frightened girl who knew nothing about corporate restructuring. Instead, I looked Victor dead in the eye, refused to sign a single page, and quietly walked away to begin building my own defense. For the next 6 months, I worked in absolute silence, unearthing the digital trail of his forgery and tracking every single cent he had illegally funneled out of the family empire. Victor monitored my court filings, and the sheer complexity of my legal responses drove him into a paranoid frenzy. He couldn't handle the fact that I was completely outclassing my new Teshi's expensive lawyers all by myself. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. Victor was so blinded by his own arrogance that he mistook my silent preparation for panic, completely unaware that his desperation to crush me was about to expose his own crimes. The heavy silence in the courtroom broke instantly as Victor's lead attorney stood up, buttoning his tailored jacket with an insufferable smirk. He carried a thick leather binder, resting it heavily on the podium as if he were delivering a final lethal blow. "Your Honor," the attorney announced, his voice booming with theatrical confidence. "We have a grave matter of criminal misconduct that must take precedence today. We have monitored the defense's filings over the past months, from intricate corporate audits to highly complex jurisdictional motions. A routine check of the local state bar database reveals that the defendant, Amber, does not possess a license to practice law in this district. Nor has she retained any registered local counsel to author these documents. Victor leaned forward at his table, his eyes gleaming with malicious satisfaction as he watched me. He wanted to see me break. He wanted to see me burst into tears or panic glance at the exit. His attorney continued, gesturing aggressively toward my side of the room. The sheer volume of advanced legal drafting submitted under her signature constitutes an absolute and flagrant violation of the law. This is a clear case of the unauthorized and illegal practice of law. We demand an immediate halt to these proceedings, a total dismissal of her counter-claims, and that the BAIF take the defendant into custody immediately. Victor's attorney slammed his binder shut, looking at the judge like a hunter who had just snapped the perfect trap shut on his prey. The entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath, waiting for my desperate defense, but I didn't say a single word. My own local consultant shifted uncomfortably beside me, whispering frantically for me to speak up, but I kept my hands folded and maintained absolute stone-cold silence. My refusal to panic completely infuriated Victor, whose smirk slightly faltered at my lack of a reaction. Instead of engaging in their theatrical trap, I simply reached into my briefcase, pulled out a thick sealed manila folder, and calmly passed it across the polished defense table to the BAIF, who carried it up to the bench. The presiding judge, a stern man with 30 years of no-nonsense experience on the bench, looked down at the folder with an irritated sigh. He sliced it open with a letter opener, expecting a messy, amateurish response. The second his eyes hit the first page, the entire atmosphere of the room shifted. I watched the color drain from his face in real time. His mouth opened slightly, and his hands visibly trembled as he flipped through the highly confidential federal documents. Victor looked confused, leaning over to his attorney, but the judge didn't give them a chance to speak. With a loud, echoing crack, the judge slammed the file shut, stood up so fast his leather chair rolled back against the wall, and vanished into his private chambers without saying a single word to anyone. 10 agonizing minutes ticked by before the heavy door to the judge's private chambers swung open. When the judge walked back into the courtroom, the irritable, dismissive attitude he had held all morning was completely gone. He sat down heavily, adjusted his glasses with trembling fingers, and looked down at Victor and his attorney with an expression of profound, chilling severity. "Counsel, step to the bench immediately," the judge commanded, his voice sharp enough to cut through the thick tension in the room. Victor's lawyer walked forward confidently, still expecting a victory, while Victor followed closely behind, eager to watch my downfall. The judge didn't waste a single second. He snorts leaned forward and held up the documents I had submitted. "Let me clear up your absurd accusation," the judge barked, looking directly at Victor's terrified attorney. "The defendant is not practicing law illegally. Amber is a senior federal compliance officer and a newly appointed federal magistrate operating under supreme jurisdiction. Her credentials completely supersede the local state bar requirements for any matter involving interstate corporate assets. She has full legal authority to audit and draft documentation for this entire estate." Victor froze, his eyes widening in absolute shock as he stared at me, realizing his quiet little sister was actually a high-ranking federal official. But the judge wasn't finished. He tapped the second half of the file with absolute fury. "Furthermore, this sealed file contains encrypted financial transfers and text logs proving that your firm has been actively bribing local probate clerks to alter the deceased's original estate records. This isn't a hearing about a fraudulent sister anymore. This is a federal exposure of corporate fraud and systemic extortion." The courtroom erupted into a chaotic murmur as the true weight of the judge's words crashed down upon the room. Victor's high-priced attorney collapsed backward into his seat, his polished confidence completely shattering into a mask of pure terror. He knew his career, his license, and his freedom were gone. Victor stood entirely minutus frozen at the podium, his breathing shallow as his arrogant facade melted away. He turned around slowly to look at me, but I didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing any anger on my face. I just matched his gaze with the same calm, unbothered silence I had maintained all morning. Realizing the absolute catastrophe he had just orchestrated for himself, Victor practically stumbled across the aisle toward my table. The malicious brother who had demanded my arrest just minutes ago was suddenly trembling, his knees visibly shaking. "Amber, please," he stammered, his voice cracking as he reached out his hands in a desperate gesture. "We need to talk about this outside. We're family." Dad wouldn't have wanted his children destroying each other like this in a public courtroom. I was just trying to protect the business. I swear. "Please tell the judge this is just a family misunderstanding. I'll give you whatever you want." He was openly begging me right in front of the bailiffs and the court reporters, utterly humiliated. I slowly stood up, leaned forward across the table, and looked him dead in the eye. "You didn't care about family when you tried to leave me penniless." "Victor," I said softly, my voice cutting through his panic like ice. "It's too late." The judge did not waste a single moment. Before Victor could even stammer another desperate plea, the judge hammered his gavel down with an echoing strike that signaled the absolute end of my brother's reign. Federal marshals, who had been quietly waiting in the back of the room, stepped forward and took Victor's trembling attorney into immediate custody. Victor was stripped of his executive authority over the family empire on the spot, facing a mountain of upcoming federal fraud, extortion, and forgery charges. 3 months later, the dust has finally settled, and the landscape of my life looks completely transformed. Victor's high-priced lawyer has been officially disbarred and is currently awaiting a lengthy prison sentence, while Victor was forced to liquidate every single one of his personal assets, just to pay back the massive estate debts he owed directly to me. Today, I sit peacefully in my new executive office, the rightful and undisputed CEO of our father's legacy, fully vindicated and completely free from the toxic shadows of my past. Now, I'm deeply curious about all of you who have listened to my journey today. What would you have done if a sibling tried to use a fraudulent law trap to put you in prison? Comment your thoughts below. And meanwhile, I am leaving right here on the final screen 2 other incredible stories that are channel favorites, and they will absolutely surprise you with their twists. Thank you so much for watching until the very end.